I put down the phone and stood in my kitchen for a long time, not moving. Rex looked up at me from his spot by the door, tilted his head, and waited. That was the moment I understood exactly what I was worth to my son. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is James. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a general contracting business from the ground up in Columbus, Ohio. Started with a single pickup truck, a used circular saw, and about $400 in my checking account. I poured concrete in January with cracked hands. I climbed roofs in summer heat that turned the shingles soft. I worked Saturdays, when other men watched football. I did it for my wife, Linda, and for our son, Nathan. Linda passed when Nathan was 19. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 11 weeks from the day they found it. I remember standing at her grave thinking that the only thing left that made any of it worth anything was the boy standing next to me, in a dark suit that was slightly too short in the arms because he had grown since the last time we needed. 1. I raised Nathan alone after that. I helped him through college. I paid his tuition, not with loans, but with cash I had saved over 20 years. When he graduated with a hospitality degree and told me he wanted to open a restaurant someday, I told him that sounded like a fine dream and that I would help him get there. I meant it. He met Vivian the following year. She came from a different world than ours. Her father was a cardiologist in Bexley. Her mother sat on the boards of 3 nonprofits and drove a white Range Rover. They were good people, as far as I could tell, polite at holidays, distant in the way that money can make people distant without them even realizing it. Vivian was sharp and beautiful and ambitious, and Nathan was clearly in love with her in the way that young men sometimes love women who challenge them to want more than they thought they could have. I liked her fine at first. I paid for their wedding. Not a small wedding either. Vivian's parents wanted something elegant, and I agreed, because Nathan was my son, and I wanted his wedding to be everything he deserved. 140 guests at a venue outside Dublin, Ohio. Flowers and a jazz quartet and a dinner that cost more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a month. I wrote the check without complaint. I did not make a speech about it. I just paid it. When they wanted to buy a house in Clintonville, I co-signed the mortgage because Nathan's business credit was not established yet. I did not put my name on the deed. I just put it on the loan so the bank would approve them. When the furnace went out that first winter, I showed up on a Saturday with my tools and fixed it myself rather than let them pay a service company 3 times what the repair was worth. And then came the restaurant. Nathan had been talking about it for years. A farm-to-table concept in the short north. Good location, strong foot traffic, the kind of neighborhood where people spend money on food as a lifestyle statement rather than just a meal. He had done his research. He had a business plan. He had a chef from a restaurant in Nashville who wanted to come back to Ohio to be closer to his family. The numbers were not crazy. With the right backing, it could work. He asked me if I would be his investor. I want to be careful here, because I have turned this over in my mind many times since, and I want to be honest. He did not pressure me. He asked. He presented the plan the way I had raised him, to present things prepared, clear, willing to answer hard questions. I asked about his margins. I asked about his lease terms. I asked about the chef's contract. He had answers for all of it. I gave him $220,000. I had a promissory note drawn up because I am not a foolish man, even when it comes to family. The note said he would begin repaying the loan 3 years after opening, at a rate we both agreed was comfortable. It was not a gift, and we both understood that. But we also both understood that if the restaurant succeeded the way we hoped, repayment would not be a hardship. The restaurant opened in March. They named it Linden, after the street where Nathan grew up. I thought that was a thoughtful thing to do. I helped with the build-out, not in any visible way. Not as a contractor on the project, but I sourced materials, called in favors with suppliers I had worked with for 3 decades, and saved them roughly $14,000 in costs that would otherwise have gone to vendors who would have charged full retail. I did it quietly because I did not want Nathan to feel like I was inserting myself into his business. I just wanted to help. The soft opening went well. Nathan called me afterward, and his voice was different than it had been in years, open and excited in the way he used to sound when he was a teenager who had just figured something out. I sat on my back porch with Rex asleep at my feet and listened to him talk for 40 minutes and felt something I had not felt in a while. Proud. Simply and completely proud. That was November. The grand opening was scheduled for the third Saturday in January. Nathan called me on the Tuesday before it. I remember I was in the garage replacing the rear brakes on my truck. I had grease on my hands and I answered the phone on speaker because I could not touch the screen cleanly. He said, "Hey," and I said, "Hey" back, and there was a pause that lasted about 2 seconds too long. He said he wanted to talk to me about Saturday. I said, "Sure. Tell me what time you need me there, and I will be there." He said, "And I am going to give you his words, as close to exactly as I can remember them," he said. "Dad, about that. Vivienne and I have been talking and we think it might be better if you came to a dinner later in the week instead. The opening is going to be a lot of press and her family's social circle and some investors we are still trying to bring in for the second location. And, you know, it is just going to be a certain kind of crowd." I did not say anything. He said, "It is not a big deal. We will have you over on Sunday for lunch. You can see the whole place then, when it is quieter." I said, "Nathan, are you telling me not to come to the opening of the restaurant I funded?" He said, "I am saying the vibe is going to be a specific thing, and I do not want you to feel uncomfortable." And there it was, that word, uncomfortable. He did not mean he was worried about my comfort. He meant I was the source of discomfort. He meant his mother's family and Vivienne's cardiologist father and the investors in their good suits would be there, and I would be there in mine, and something about that picture did not work for him and his wife. I asked him if Vivienne was nearby. He said she was in the other room. I asked if she agreed with this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, she thought it would be for the best. She did not get on the phone. She did not say anything. She was in the other room and she stayed there." I told Nathan I understood. I told him I would see him Sunday. I told him to have a great opening night. I hung up. Rex was sitting at the garage door watching me. He is a 7-year-old shepherd mix, gray around the muzzle now, and he has a way of looking at you when something has shifted in the room that makes you feel like at least one creature in the world is paying honest attention. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and sat down on the concrete step, and he came over and leaned his weight against my leg. I sat there for a long time. I thought about Linda. I thought about how she used to say that the people who love you will walk toward you when things are hard, not away from you. She had a clarity about people that I never quite matched. I think if she had been alive, things would have been different. Not because Vivienne is a bad person, but because Linda would have set a tone early that made certain choices harder to make. She would have made sure Nathan understood the difference between honoring the life you came from and being ashamed of it. But Linda was not here. And Nathan had made his choice. I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with Rex on the floor beside me, and I thought about what I had been for the past several years. I thought about the wedding check, and the mortgage cosign, and the $220,000, and the $14,000 in saved costs, and the Saturday furnace repair, and every holiday I had driven to their house because they were always too busy to come to mine. And every time I had been handed my grandson Tyler at the door and taken him to the zoo or the science museum, while Nathan and Vivienne had a weekend to themselves, and every card I had signed and every meal I had paid for, at every birthday dinner. And I thought about the word uncomfortable. I called my lawyer that evening. My attorney is a woman named Patricia who has handled my business contracts for 15 years. I told her I needed to talk about the promissory note and some other arrangements. She asked if everything was okay. I said I needed to think through some contingencies. She said, "Come in Thursday morning." I also called my accountant. His name is Carl, and he has been my accountant but also my friend since we were in the same church softball league in 1998. I told him I needed to review my financial exposure in a few areas. He said he would pull everything. I did not sleep well that Tuesday night, or Wednesday night. But by Thursday morning, something had settled in me. Not anger, exactly. Anger burns hot and then it cools and leaves you feeling foolish. What I felt was more like clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you have been looking at something slightly sideways for a long time and you finally turn to face it directly. Patricia reviewed the promissory note with me. She explained what my legal options were and what the timeline would look like if I chose to move forward. I asked her to proceed. She asked if I was certain. I told her yes. Then something happened that I had not anticipated, and it changed the shape of everything. On Friday morning, I got a text message from a number I did not recognize. It was short. It said, "Just wanted you to know that some of us are rooting for you on Saturday. You built that boy's dream. You deserve to be there." I did not know who it was from. Someone at the restaurant, maybe. Someone who knew Nathan, or knew the story, or had simply been in a room at some point when something was said that should not have been said. I sat with that text for a minute. Then I looked at my own phone and realized I could see, in the thread of messages between Nathan and me, that at some point a few days before his call he had forwarded me a screenshot by accident, or maybe not fully by accident. People do strange things under guilt, and in that screenshot was a text conversation between him and Vivienne. In that conversation, Vivienne had written, "I cannot keep pretending I am comfortable with him being such a central presence. He is lovely, but he is a reminder of everything we are moving past. The grand opening is our moment. Just ours, not his." Nathan had replied, "I know. I will handle it." And Vivienne had written back, "Thank you. I love you. This is our life now." I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table. Everything we are moving past. I had spent $220,000 and 30 years of fatherhood on being something they were moving past. I called Patricia back. I told her to accelerate the timeline. I told her about the mortgage cosign and asked what my exposure was and what my options were for removing my name from that note. She said it was complicated but not impossible and that we should get the mortgage servicer on the phone the following week. I told her that was fine. I also called my bank. I had Nathan listed as a secondary on one of my accounts, not a joint account, but a beneficiary account that he could access in an emergency. I had set that up 3 years ago when I had a health scare and wanted him to be able to handle things if something happened to me. I removed him from that account on Friday afternoon. Saturday came. I got up early. Rex needed his morning walk and I took him down to the park near my house, the one along the creek where the trees still had frost on the branches in January. We walked for an hour. A couple of people were there with their own dogs. Rex greeted them the way he always does, carefully, with dignity, sniffing once and then sitting down as if to say he had assessed the situation and found it acceptable. I thought about Nathan at the restaurant. I imagined the white tablecloths and the candles and Vivienne in a dress that cost more than my first truck. I imagined her parents and the investors and the press and Nathan shaking hands and smiling and being exactly the version of himself that he had decided to become. I hoped the food was good. I genuinely did, but I was not there. And neither was $220,000 going to be there for very much longer. The following week, Patricia sent the formal demand letter. The promissory note had an acceleration clause, a standard provision that said if I had reasonable cause to believe my investment was at risk, I could call in the full balance with 90 days' notice. Patricia argued, carefully and correctly, that being excluded from the grand opening of a business in which I held a $220,000 note constituted a material breach of the good faith terms we had agreed upon. It was not bulletproof, but it was solid. And more importantly, it opened a conversation that Nathan could not avoid having. He called me the Monday after the grand opening. His voice was different this time. The excitement was gone. There was something tight in it. He said, "Dad, I got a letter from your lawyer." I said, "Yes, I know." He said, "What is this?" I said, "It is a formal demand notice on your promissory note." He said, "You cannot be serious." I said, "Nathan, I am 63 years old. I do not make legal filings as a joke." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "This is about Saturday, isn't it?" I said, "It is about a lot of things. But yes, Saturday is part of it." He started to say something about how I was being unfair, how the opening had been a business decision, how I was making this personal when it was professional. I let him talk. I have been in enough contract disputes over 30 years to know that the person who needs to talk the most is usually the one who knows they are in the wrong. When he stopped, I said, "Nathan, I want to ask you something and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If the situation were reversed, if I had borrowed $220,000 from you, and you had worked for years towards something important, And the night it finally happened, I called you and told you not to come because you would make my guests uncomfortable. What would you think of me?" He did not answer. I said, "I am not calling in the note to punish you. I am calling it in because I needed to do something that reflected reality. The reality is that I am your father, and I funded your dream, and I was told to stay home. Those things cannot all be true at the same time without one of them meaning something." He said, "Dad," I said, "I love you. I will always love you. But I am 63 years old, and I built something with my hands, and I am not going to spend what is left of my time being managed out of rooms by my own family." I hung up. Rex came and put his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears for a long time. Over the following 2 weeks, the rest of it came together in the way that these things do when a person has finally made a clear decision. Patricia continued the process on the promissory note. My accountant Carl reviewed everything and confirmed that my cosign on the mortgage could be removed with the right approach to the servicer, especially given that Nathan and Vivian had 3 years of payment history that supported a refinance into their names alone. I was not throwing them out of the house. I was removing myself from an obligation I had no reason to carry for people who considered me a liability. Carl, sitting across from me at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the kind of expression that old friends use when they have something honest to say, told me he thought I was doing the right thing. He said he had watched me bend myself into the shape my son needed for a long time, and he was glad I had finally stopped. I told him I did not feel triumphant about any of it. He said the best decisions rarely feel good. They just feel right. Nathan and Vivienne came to my house on a Thursday evening about 3 weeks after the demand letter. They sat on my couch, and Rex sat by the fireplace and looked at them with his calm, neutral dog attention. Vivienne looked uncomfortable. Nathan looked like he had not been sleeping. She spoke first, which surprised me. She said she owed me an apology. She said that the text I had seen, and she knew I had seen it, Nathan had told her was something she was ashamed of. She said she had been trying to protect something that did not need protecting, and in doing so she had diminished someone who did not deserve it. I listened to all of it. I did not say it was fine. I did not say everything was forgiven. I am not interested in false reconciliation at my age. But I thanked her for saying it because I could tell it cost her something to come here and say it to my face, and that cost is worth acknowledging. Nathan said, "Dad, what can we do?" I said, "Right now? Nothing. Pay back what the contract says you owe. On the schedule Patricia sets. Take care of my grandson. Build your restaurant well. Those are not small things." He asked if we were done. I said, "I do not know what we are. I know what we were. And I know what happened. And I know that neither one of those things goes away. What we are going forward is going to be up to you as much as it is up to me." He nodded. His eyes were red, and I was not going to pretend I did not notice, and I was also not going to pretend it did not matter to me, because he is my son and it did matter. But I have spent enough of my life making other people comfortable at the cost of my own dignity, and that chapter was finished. They left around 9. Rex and I went out to the back porch. It was cold, a proper January cold that comes up off the ground and gets into your coat no matter how good the coat is. I had a blanket and a glass of something warm, and Rex had his spot on the old cushion I keep for him out there. The thing about getting older is that the world gets quieter in a way that is not sad once you stop fighting it. The need for noise and validation and the constant proving of things falls away, and what is left is the actual texture of your life. The stars over Columbus on a clear winter night, the weight of a good dog sleeping near your feet, the knowledge that you built something real and spent it honestly on people you loved, and that if some of those people chose not to see that clearly, the failure of vision was theirs and not yours. I thought about Linda. I think about her often in the quiet. I think she would have understood what I did. I think she might have done it sooner. I had been the bank, the co-signer, the checkbook, the Saturday repair call, the quiet funding behind every visible success. I had been all of those things for so long that somewhere along the way, both Nathan and I had forgotten that I was also a person, a man who had worked 31 years and buried his wife and raised his son alone and still had mornings worth waking up for and evenings worth sitting in. I was not the bank anymore. The bank was closed, and sitting on that porch with Rex warm against my ankle and the night cold and clean around me, I felt something I had not felt in years. Not happiness exactly, or at least not just happiness, something larger and quieter than happiness. The specific piece of a man who has stopped making himself small to fit into rooms where he was never fully welcome. Spring came slow that year. By April, the promissory note repayment schedule had been formally agreed to and signed. By May, the mortgage refinance was in process, and my name was being removed from the note. I had no ill will about any of it. I wanted them to succeed with the restaurant. I wanted Tyler to grow up in a house with two parents who made something of themselves. I wanted Nathan to build the life he had chosen. I just was not going to fund it from the outside of it anymore. In June, Nathan called me on a Sunday morning. Not about money. Not about lawyers. He just called and asked how I was doing. I told him I was good. I told him Rex had been limping a little and I had taken him to the vet and they said it was just arthritis starting, nothing serious, and the vet had given me some medication that seemed to be helping. Nathan was quiet for a second and then he said, "I always liked Rex." I said, "Rex always liked you too." We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing important. The weather, the Buckeyes' spring practices, a kitchen renovation I was thinking about doing. Normal things. The kind of things that fathers and sons talk about when they are figuring out how to be in each other's lives without the old architecture of obligation and resentment holding the whole thing up. When we hung up, I did not feel like I had won anything. That was never the point. I took Rex out to the backyard. The grass was coming in green after a wet spring, and he walked through it slowly, the way older dogs do, pausing to sniff things that younger dogs walk right past. I watched him from the back step with my coffee and thought about what the next few years might look like. I thought about maybe going up to Canada in August to do some fishing. Carl had been talking about a lake in Ontario for 3 years, and I had always said maybe next year. I thought maybe this time I would actually go. I thought about what I would leave behind when I eventually left. Not money. Not the business, which I had already begun winding down toward retirement. Whether I had allowed myself to be seen clearly by the people who mattered, or whether I had made myself invisible in the service of being needed, I had spent too long being needed in all the wrong ways. Rex came back up the steps and sat next to me. The morning was bright and still, and the neighbor's magnolia was in full bloom over the fence. I finished my coffee. I had nowhere I needed to be, and no one I needed to manage my presence around, and nothing to prove to anyone. That was enough. I realized sitting there in the warm Ohio morning with an old dog and a cold cup and the sound of a lawnmower starting up somewhere down the street that was actually more than enough. It was everything.